Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class, a production of iHeartRadio. Hello and happy Friday. I'm Holly Fry.
And I'm Tracy V. Wilson.
And we talked about Alger Hiss this week. Who is fascinating to me. And as I said at the top of that, I grew up hearing about him all the time. I don't know why. There were two things that I promised I would talk about. Well, I promised one, and I promised myself the other. The first was the typewriter. So the case that his lawyers tried to make to counter that evidence that had been introduced that typewriter was the typewriter in their home was intense. They did a lot of work. It actually went on for a couple of years, even after he had been incarcerated, where they actually had an expert put together essentially a new typewriter that could mimic exactly what Hiss's home typewriter did to show people could totally do this. They could have built their own copycat typewriter. And there was also work done where they were trying to make the case that potentially the typewriter that was produced wasn't even as part of evidence in court, wasn't even Hiss's typewriter, but one that had been altered to look like Hiss's typewriter. They made a lot of efforts to show the ways that those documents could have been forged and made to look like they came from the Hiss home.
Sure.
But ultimately, the judge that heard those appeals was like, I just don't think Whitaker Chambers had the time and energy to do something like this, which is kind of interesting. I just find that fascinating. I know what we'll do. We're going to hire a typewriter forgery expert to build a new typewriter. It's really interesting. I'm not even dogging it. I just think it's fascinating.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to mention was his not divorce. So apparently several years after he got out of prison, he asked his wife Priscilla for a divorce, and she said no. And it seems like he may have met his second wife already at that point. I don't have substantiation on this, which is why I didn't want to put it in the episode, but it's interesting. And that he had wanted to marry her then, but he couldn't because his wife wouldn't give him a divorce. And so then they just had to wait. And then when Priscilla died, they got married shortly thereafter. Just kind of interesting.
Yeah.
There's a part of me. I'm not generally a conspiracy theorist, but there is part of me that's he did seem to want to unearth so much stuff that part of me is he might have been innocent. I can't imagine, you know what I mean? It's one of those cases where if you are not innocent, why would you want to work so hard to have every possible document released?
Right.
But one thing that several historians have pointed out is that, when his lawyers, for example, would get information from documents, they would, of course, kind of cherry pick what made Hiss look best. So it's it's an interesting game of, I don't know. I don't know. Will we ever know conclusively? Probably not. Most people accept he was a spy of some sort.
Right.
But I don't. Spies. Are you generally into Cold War history stuff? We haven't talked about it a lot on the show because it's so recent.
Not really. In terms of fictional depictions, I can find a good spy story really interesting and compelling. But I feel like having been born when I was born and kind of growing up in the very tail end of the existence of the USSR and all of that. We were not in the thick of the Cold War, really. I would say that the things were a lot more heightened in terms of that earlier. But I do remember sort of the looming fear of nuclear war when I was a kid. And it makes it less of a draw for me.
Right. I think probably having a dad that was in the military shifted that for me a little.
Yeah.
It felt very much like that was always part of our household discussions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
I love a good inconclusive story, though. I do. I love a history mystery. On the one hand, it's interesting to know that there was obviously some group of people high up in our government that was communicating with the Soviets, right? And I'm sure the same was going on in reverse, right? It's always just fascinating to me, like that aspect of human nature where it's like you are in a seat of power and success, and something about it makes you want to do dangerous stuff and like normalize dangerous stuff. I'm such a wimp. I want no part of dangerous things. So I'm always like, what is that headspace like?
Right.
What is it like? Like, how do you go about your day-to-day life? Is it constantly something you're thinking about? Or is it just like compartmentalized in a way that you don't give it a lot of thought beyond like the needs of the things you're doing in terms of logistics? I'm fascinated by it. Anyway.
Yeah.
Which is why I wanted to do this one. Alger Hiss. This is our on-ramp to Halloween things. I promise Halloween stuff is coming, but this at least had pumpkins in it.
Yeah. When I got the outline from you, I was like, I'm surprised this is not more Halloween themed. And then I read through it. It was like, oh, there's a ghost story article and a pumpkin.
Well, and I will tell you that part of that is accidental because I had looked at our calendar a while back and calculated out how many episodes I had to have ready that were not Halloween before we got to October. I mean, I would talk about Halloween stuff year round, but that's not really appropriate for most people. I have talked to several people lately who are like, I don't like the Halloween stuff in September. Not related to our show, but just in life. And I was like, I don't understand you. Get out of the car. I don't really, you can like it or not. That's fine. I love it year round. But I just miscalculated. So I thought this was going to be the end of September. And then I realized, no, it's in October. But there's October coming. I promise.
Yeah.
Promise.
Well, and I don't know what order we're going to put these in. But we also today recorded the one about the medieval and early modern animal trials, which has some, witchcrafty witch trial parallels. So similarly, kind of a on-ramp.
It's like ish. It's in there. It's an on-ramp. So hopefully you are ready for Halloween happenings. Listen, there's witchcraft coming up. There's some murder coming up. Wild things are afoot here at Stuff You Missed in History Class. I don't know how wild it'll actually be, but hopefully you'll enjoy it. Oh, we talked about Carlo Gesualdo this week. I don't know how he got on my list either. I feel like all of them lately I've been like, where did I get this person? But I will say there are a lot of people, while I was researching this, that went on the list because there are people that got obsessed with him.
Oh, sure.
And some of them are very interesting. So they may pop up this year, and they may be later. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. Did you know about Carlo Gesualdo before this?
No, I don't think this is even a name that really rang a bell from the music composition standpoint. Definitely not the murder standpoint.
No, the murder stuff is woof.
Yeah.
Woof.
Yeah.
Woof. He is one of those figures that people just become obsessed with. And I understand why, because he was obviously eccentric, obviously capable of great violence. There is that natural instinct to want to pick apart how a person like that ticks. I think personally for a lot of people, it's like actually a distancing mechanism, right? When you're like, I want to know how this played out with this person, because that way I know that I am not like that and people in my life are not like that. Like, I think subconsciously that's part of what you're doing. It's creating a space between you and something scary.
Yeah. You and I don't live in a time and place where an honor killing is a legally acceptable remedy.
Yeah.
But there are places in the world where that is still
the case. Yeah.
So simultaneously hearing about it in this context was like, that is so bizarre to me that this would be, people would say, oh, yeah, you did have the right to go and murder them. But like simultaneously acknowledging that there are places where like that does still happen and is still sort of seen as an appropriate legal action for something that either has happened or is alleged to have happened.
Yeah, and what's interesting here, and I really appreciated the fact that there is a degree of nuance, because there were people then who were like, "Nuh-uh, that was not okay," because of the manner that he carried things out, and because of the level of brutality of it. There was sort of a recognition that even with that pretty horrific acceptability level in place, that there were limits to it, which I just find interesting.
Right.
And I also am kind of interested in this idea that for a time he essentially like blew up the social structure of Naples by like making the most powerful families all kind of have this really horrible and problematic issue at their core. That's very interesting to me. As far as how he got things chill enough with those families to go back to Naples, it's a little unclear. And I think I only found one mention of it where it was essentially like, he eventually made peace with Maria's family. And I'm like, but how? Like, how'd that work out? And I don't know. One of the other interesting things about his biography in particular is that it's a really good example of something you and I see all the time, where when there's a case like this that has some existing documentation on it, like the church's court records about what happened and their determination exists, that document remains. It's in Italian, so I was reading, obviously, translations of it. But there aren't a lot of such documents about him. And so there becomes that sort of rabbit hop a game of, as you're reading one account, it's referencing another account that you already read. And that's tying back to another historian that has studied it. And like, you kind of get the round robin of source names being like played out over and over. But what I also found really fun in this one, as much as you can find fun in such a grisly tale, was about those relationships, because in a lot of cases it would be like, well, in this version that came out in the 1700s, they say this, but we all know that's wrong now. And then later on, another historian would reference that person and say, well, you know, that person that contradicted that, we all know they're wrong now. Like, there are a lot of interesting developments. One of the other things that I didn't work into the episode because it just was convoluted, but I thought was interesting, is that that Alex Ross piece from the New Yorker mentions that even today there's sort of new information coming out. And I say today, that was written in 2011, so 15 years ago, but not quite 15. There are still new pieces of information coming out, and that it's possible that the building that still exists, that everyone has believed forever was where these murders took place, now there are some people that say that is not accurate, that it was actually a different building. And this becomes important because he was actually, if that's the case, he would have been renting that home from a relative of Fabrizio. So just to like further cement how intertwined all of this stuff was and how complicated it was socially, that struck me as fascinating.
Yeah.
Hopefully more Halloween will be fun and not so grisly. I'm in a grisly murder stage right now. I don't know why. Just am.
Yeah.
I always say I'm fine. I'm not, going through anything. I just sometimes
you got to talk about a murder.
Sometimes I like talking about dark stuff. It's fascinating.
I will add that I really appreciated the quote that was in here from W.B. Ober.
Yeah.
About using what would have been modern methods in 1973 to try to diagnose him.
Yeah.
That whole field has come, of course, through a lot. Many things have developed since 1973, but like a lot of the core things that he was saying are still absolutely true. Like, even when we do know more about a person than we know about Gesualdo personally, like that still does not provide the same kind of background and depth as actually being examined by someone.
Yes, I might ruin that moment for you in a moment.
Okay.
Because Ober said all that as sort of the precursor to go, but here's what I think.
What would That cracks me up. But what did he think?
I mean, he basically was making the case that Gesualdo probably may have had some, repressed sexual issues that he didn't know how to express, that he kind of makes the case that he may have been homosexual. He doesn't really say he could have been bisexual, but he does say, but he did father children with women, which is kind of interesting. And that he may have just had some, very specific fixations that you can kind of see playing out in his later life when he's hiring people to beat him, when he is having trouble using the bathroom without that being in play. He talks it through, but he's like, I will only ever make a comment that is supported or based some way in something we actually know. His approach to doing that and saying it's worth talking about what was going on, but we have to be careful. That he would never make a leap of faith and go, I think what's happening is. Yeah. He would say this seems like it might be the case, but we have to also factor in these three things we know. He was careful about it, but it was still but here's where he might have been. Here's what could have been going on with him.
Yeah, as a person who's not a psychologist, but has read a lot of things about trying to diagnose people from history and about the history of psychology, that feels like a pretty dated interpretation to me.
Oh, for sure.
But the points about all of the severe limitations of trying to diagnose someone from 350 years later, that all holds up.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah, it's almost like he's like, I know this is what people want. And that was all from a journal that was written about medicine and was about, people trying to unravel this thing. So it is sort of the most responsible approach you could have had for it in the early 70s. Although, as you said, some of those ideas are very outdated now.
Yeah.
But we'll never know. I think that was probably a tortured human who made a lot of chaos. A tortured human with time on his hands who made a lot of chaos as a result. If he had been a busy bee, if he had work to do, if he had outside of just being driven by his own stuff, he might have found more, I don't know, structure, some sort of peace somehow. I don't know. He clearly did not have peace in his heart or mind. Just sad. Yeah, Carlo Gesualdo. Don't be like Carlo. If you find him interesting, rest assured you can find hours and hours and hours of both musical analysis, as well as, people looking at his life story. YouTube has you covered, man. You can listen to those madrigals for a long time. Although there are funny things that people write, like, "Ooh, don't listen to them for a long time. They'll just make you feel weird." And it's like, I mean, I guess I didn't feel weird. I had a lot of his stuff playing while I was writing. And some of it is quite striking, but I'd never felt weird. So,
right.
Carlo. If this is your weekend coming up, I hope you find some peace in your heart and your mind and that you get some time to just relax, hang out, man. We need it. If you don't have that kind of time, that stinks, and I'm sorry, but I hope everybody's really nice to you and that we're all busy taking care of each other. We will be right back here tomorrow with a classic episode and then a fresh one on Monday.
Stuff You Missed in History Class is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.